And it got the support of 33 Republicans in the House, even though the NRA was opposed to it. They are notable because the NRA scored, and yet you heard it right. The National Rifle Association is opposed to the latest version of the Violence Against Women Act, and too many Republicans are just going along. Why? Incredibly, one of the primary reasons the NRA is against this bill is because it closes Senator Klobuchar's amendment, the boyfriend loophole, which would ensure that dating partners convicted of domestic abuse can lose access to their guns. The NRA is woefully out of step with the American people on this issue. Common sense, the same common sense that says if you're a spousal abuser you shouldn't get a gun, says if you're a boyfriend who has treated his girlfriend very badly, he shouldn't get a gun either. So shouldn't matter whether you're married or not. You've got to protect the survivor. Senate Republicans should join their 33 House colleagues in standing up to the NRA and supporting this bill designed to better protect survivors of domestic violence from their attackers. In addition, the House VAWA bill contained critical provisions to tribal communities, and they've been ignored. When women have been abused on tribal lands, they don't get the same protections that women in the rest of America get. They should be. And I want to salute the Native American community for going along with this issue because it's so important. So, we believe these provisions should not be watered down. We believe funding for the Violence Against Women Act, which Senator Feinstein will talk about, is extremely important. And we're calling on Leader McConnell to bring the House-passed VAWA bill up for a vote without delay. And Senate Republicans should stand up to special interests. They should publicly demand that Leader McConnell bring the bill forward if they care about protecting violence against women. Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Leader. It's amazing, but the Violence Against Women Act turns 25 later this year. I was here when it began. I remember the climate. I remember the delight that women took at that time in seeing this law become part of everyone's life. The original law had two key purposes. First, it improved the ability of law enforcement to investigate and prosecute sex offenses. This includes increased penalties for stalking and a requirement that states enforce protection orders from other states. That's now well accepted. It was not then. And second, the original bill provided a wide range of grant programs to address violence against women from a different variety of angles. They included grants for the law enforcement, public and private service providers, and crime victims. Since then, the bill has been reauthorized 3 times, in 2000, in 2005, and 2013. And each year, the bill has been improved to better protect women. And I hope we do that again this year. Federal funds have been key. And for 2018, VAWA saw $553 million in federal funds. Much of that went to the Department of Justice's Office of Violence Against Women. As a member of the Appropriations Committee, I've had the pleasure of voting for this and will continue to do so. And I'll be working with Senator Joni Ernst on this year's reauthorization. We think the House bill is a very good bill. It's strong. It has more than a dozen improvements over the 2013 reauthorization, each of which I plan to discuss with Senator Ernst. So I think the House bill also increases the authorization of the Rape Prevention and Education Program from $50 million, it trebles it to $150 million. So this is really an important time. And I remember the struggle that this was at the beginning. And now to see that it's established and really accepted by and large by virtually everyone. I hope that continues this time. Thank you.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. Thank you, Senator Schumer, Senator Shaheen. So this is an opportunity we have right now to greatly improve the Violence Against Women Act. Every time this bill comes up for reauthorization, we have the opportunity to improve the bill so that we can get at the crimes that we're seeing against women. And one of the things we've learned over time is that there is a high rate of domestic homicides with guns. And for too long, the ban on getting a gun if you have been convicted of the serious crime of domestic abuse has only applied to married partners, former married partners, or people who live together. Yet nearly half of the homicides, the domestic homicides, are by boyfriends. And so, or some cases, girlfriends. And so that's why this is called the boyfriend loophole. We have been proposing this, Representative Dingell and I, she leading the bill in the House, I've been leading the bill in the Senate for years. We've gotten nowhere until now. And that is despite the fact that there are witnesses on the Republican side that have appeared before the Judiciary Committee that have strongly supported closing this loophole. And we also have in there a provision that would ban people from getting guns if they've been convicted of stalking because of the high incidence of domestic homicides. So here's what we know. We know that a sheriff from Racine County said this. He said, dangerous boyfriends, this is in Wisconsin, dangerous boyfriends can be just as scary as dangerous husbands. They hit just as hard and they fire their guns with the same deadly force. That was at a judiciary hearing just a few years ago. According to the Department of Justice, nearly half of women killed by romantic partners are killed by dating partners. That's why this is so important and why it was included in the House bill. So I'm going to end with this just to remind people what VAWA is about and the fact that it is not just about the dating partner or even the married partner. It is about our whole community. It's about the kids in the family. It's about the neighbors, and it's about everyone that lives in a community when domestic violence hits. We had a case in Minnesota a few years ago where a police officer, young police officer, was called to a scene. It was a domestic report. He went to the door, opened the door. There was a boyfriend in that house that had mental health problems. The young woman who was dating him had called for help. Police officer shows up. The guy shoots him in the face, and he dies. And I was at that funeral. And when I found out when I got there was that the last time that dad, the police officer, had been in that church was for the nativity play for Christmas with his 3 kids. The next time he was in that church was in a coffin with his 3 kids walking down the aisle with their mom sobbing and this little daughter in a blue dress with stars on it. So my question is to the NRA, really? Are you going to be on the side now of domestic abusers and stalkers, or are you going to be on the side of the women of this country? And that's what we're going to be asking our Republican colleagues. We know that 33 Republican House members voted for this bill, and we want to see that kind of support in the Senate.
Thank you, Amy. Senator Shaheen.
Well, amen, Senator Klobuchar. As we know, for many generations, domestic violence was something that people didn't talk about. Fortunately, in more recent decades, since we passed the Violence Against Women Act, we've started to have more honest conversations about domestic violence, and we've taken important steps to protect women and other vulnerable members of our society. Since VAWA was signed into law in 1994, Congress has worked on a bipartisan basis to fund and improve this groundbreaking legislation. And just to follow up on what Senator Klobuchar said, every member of Congress has a responsibility to prevent toxic partisan politics from undermining this law. We need to tune out the special interests who are obstructing this reauthorization. You know, they tried to do it in 2013. I was here. All of the women in the Senate got together, Republicans and Democrats, and we reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act at that point. And as Senator Klobuchar said, it is a fact that the presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation increases the risk of homicide by 500%. 72% of all murder-suicides involve an intimate partner, and 94% of the victims of these murder-suicides are female. A month ago, tomorrow, in New Hampshire, in a small community called Hollis, a rural community, we had one of those murder-suicides. We had a 51-year-old man who murdered a 41-year-old woman with a handgun, shot her in the head, and then turned the gun on himself. So this is not something that happens someplace else. This happens in our communities everywhere across this country. And we're not going to ignore this awful threat just because it might affect the NRA's bottom line. So we've got to continue to improve the Violence Against Women Act, as everyone who's spoken here has said. We've got to continue to fund this law on a bipartisan basis. We owe it to every individual in this country who fears for their safety because of a domestic threat. When it comes to protecting women and other vulnerable members of our society from violence, Congress must speak with one voice. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank my three colleagues for their excellent presentations. I forgot to add that I was actually the author of the Violence Against Women bill, or the sponsor, the lead sponsor in the House. Senator Boxer had put it together when she was a Congress member. Then she moved to the Senate, called me and said, carry it in the House, and we passed it. And it's done huge amounts of good, huge amounts of good. The shelters that people can go to, the education of the police officers. It's done so much good, and our Republican friends should not be playing games with something so important. Questions?
The Borderline Abortion Survivor Protection Act says that a baby who survives an abortion must receive immediate medical care and be admitted to a hospital. Do you believe that denying such care constitutes infanticide?
You know, this issue has been brought up over and over again, and it's bogus in terms of how our Republican friends are interpreting this. Infanticide is against the law, and a woman has a right to decide what is her choice with her doctor before that moment, before the child is born. So this is all just, again, fear-mongering and falsification of what is actually happening. Infanticide is already illegal.
Leader Schumer, Leader McConnell was here a couple of moments ago and was asked about Robert Mueller and the report, and said he trusts Attorney General William Barr. Do you trust Barr? Do you trust that these redactions are going to be done in compliance with the law?
Look, I'll wait till I see it, but thus far I don't think Barr has conducted himself in a manner that earns people's trust. To issue a report quickly within 48 hours and now spend weeks before he issues the full report, it calls into question why he was doing what he did. We've heard reports in the media from some people on Mueller's team that he didn't portray the report fairly. We'll wait to see the report, but color me dubious that he's going to be fair unless he proves otherwise.
Senator Schumer? I was just thinking of the sense of when the Senate bill would be together.
We want to pass the House bill. We don't have to have a Senate bill. Senator Feinstein has said that she believes the House bill is the right bill to go for, and Senator Ernst ought to come along with the House bill if she believes in protecting women.
Senator Shelby said before lunch that the Democrats rejected a serious and substantial offer on disaster relief. Can you say why that is? And also, can you say, is it a double standard for Republicans to ask for disaster relief for their home states if they voted against Sandy relief in 2013?
Well, look, we've lived with that. Some of our Republican friends desperate for disaster aid when it's their states and don't help other states. Democrats have not done that. We believe we all ought to pull together and help American citizens wherever they are. We have offered a bill now, Senator Leahy and I, that funds both the Midwestern areas that have been flooded and Puerto Rico. And this idea that, well, Puerto Rico should be treated differently than other places is unfair. If food stamps is good enough for Puerto Rico, then let's just do food stamps for the other areas. But if they want to rebuild homes and want to rebuild roads, we need full relief for all of America. That's what Leahy's amendment and my amendment does. And if they believe in that, they ought to pass it. We all know what happened. President Trump went to the Republican lunch and said that he's for no aid for Puerto Rico, and then they backed off their position. That's wrong, and that will not prevail. The House will never go along with it. So if they want aid for other areas, they ought to treat every part of America fairly.
The President announced his intent to nominate Stephen Moore and Herman Cain to the Federal Reserve. Your views on their fitness for those posts?
You know, I'll wait for the hearings, but the bottom line is that the reaction among even conservative economists like Greg Mankiw that this would politicize the Fed, one of the last parts of the federal government that hasn't been politicized, I think is very, very real. I don't see the qualifications of Cain or Moore fitting in with the mission of the Fed, which is to conduct monetary policy and not be political. Thank you, everybody. Sorry.